ever feel like when you hear native English speakers talking, they're just zipping right through sentences, like at warp speed?
Yeah, it can almost feel like they're speaking some kind of secret language that you haven't quite been let in on yet.
Right. Like, how do they do that? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be diving deep into today. Fast English.
That's right.
You want to not only be able to keep up, but also sound natural too, right?
Yeah.
Like the native American English speaker.
Yeah.
And the sources that you've shared take this really unique approach to this, I think, where they go beyond just the kind of like textbook phrases you learn
Right.
and really analyze how everyday sentences get shortened
Yeah.
and kind of like blended together in casual conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so fascinating how much we as native speakers kind of take these shortcuts for granted.
Right.
And linguists have a name for this. They call them reductions, and they're absolutely key to sounding natural, like we were just talking about.
Okay.
But I feel like textbooks rarely teach them well, but they're everywhere in everyday speech.
Yeah, I'm looking at an example from one of the sources right now that breaks down how "do you want to go" transforms in fast speech.
Okay.
And so first it becomes "do you want to go?"
Right.
And then eventually it can even sound like "Jew want to go."
Yeah.
So it really is kind of like cracking a code, I feel like.
It is. And by focusing on these really common phrases, you can actually practice these reductions in a way that like really makes them stick. It's not just theory.
Yeah.
You're building muscle memory for your mouth.
And some of these reductions are hilarious.
They are.
One source points out how "it's a hot one today" becomes "it's a hot one today."
That's a classic one.
The disappearing T is a classic.
Yeah, final T's often vanish in fast American English.
Right.
And it's a big part of what gives the language its kind of like distinctive rhythm.
Yeah, and then there's "I don't know," which morphs into "I don't know," "I don't know," or even just
Yeah.
casual speech gets incredibly relaxed.
It does. It really does. But that kind of brings up an important point about social context.
Okay.
So while these reductions are great for informal settings, like hanging out with friends or family, they might not be appropriate for, let's say, a job interview.
Oh, absolutely, though. I have to admit, it's tempting to imagine responding with, "in my next big meeting."
Right.
Okay, maybe not the best idea, but using the right level of formality is crucial.
Definitely. And speaking of sounding American, you know, your sources also point out certain pronunciation tweaks that can really give away a non-native speaker.
Yeah.
For instance, did you notice how pretty often ends up sounding more like pretty?
Yeah, these tiny little tweaks make such a huge difference.
Exactly. It might feel strange at first, but imitating these sounds is key to sounding more natural.
Okay.
You're essentially training your mouth to move in new ways.
Okay.
Like, you know, new dance moves for your tongue.
I love that. Yeah, it does feel a bit like a new dance for your tongue, like trying to get these sounds right.
Yeah.
But it's incredible how these like really subtle shifts can make you sound more like a native speaker.
It really is. And it's not just about the ends of words either.
Okay.
Remember how we were talking about that T disappearing?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes it vanishes in the middle of words too.
Oh, yeah. That was mind-blowing.
Right.
A source gave this example of like, "you got to try it," which turns into "you got to try." The T becomes a D, and then the final T of it just disappears.
Yeah, it's all about efficiency and flow, you know, when you're speaking fast.
Right.
And it's not just T's either.
Okay.
G's often transform too. Think about how going becomes going.
So it's like I'm embracing my inner sound swapper if I really want to nail that American English sound.
Precisely. It's about letting go of those perfectly enunciated textbook pronunciations.
Right.
And allowing your speech to flow more naturally.
Challenge accepted. I'm ready to get my goat on.
There you go.
But seriously, this is fascinating stuff.
It is.
It's like learning the secret handshake of fluency.
And the more you pay attention to these reductions, the more you'll start to hear them everywhere. In music, in movies, even in everyday conversations.
Right.
You'll start to realize just how common they are.
Wait a minute. Does that mean I've been speaking fast English without even realizing it?
Maybe.
Like all those times I said wanna instead of want to? Was I unknowingly a fluency ninja this whole time?
Perhaps you were. We all use these reductions to some extent, especially in casual settings.
Right.
It's a natural part of how language evolves and adapts to our need to communicate quickly and efficiently.
Okay. I am officially obsessed with this.
Okay.
But let's get practical again.
Okay.
If someone listening wanted to try this out, what's a good way to start practicing these reductions without sounding completely awkward?
That's a great question. One tip is to start by just listening closely to how native speakers use these reductions.
Okay.
Pay attention to the context, their tone of voice, their facial expressions. It's all about observation.
Ooh, like a language spy? I love it.
Exactly.
But what about actually like saying the words out loud?
Yeah.
Any tips for getting over that initial awkwardness of trying something new?
Practicing in a low-pressure environment can be really helpful, maybe with a friend who's also learning English.
Right.
Or even just by yourself in front of a mirror.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
It's like anything else, the more you practice, the more comfortable you'll become.
Right.
And hey, even if you mess up,
Yeah.
it's all part of the learning process, right?
Absolutely. Making mistakes is inevitable, and it's how we learn and improve. So embrace those fumbles, laugh them off, and keep practicing.
I love that attitude.
Yeah.
So we've got our listener practicing reductions, channeling their inner language spy, and not being afraid to make a few glorious mistakes.
Yes.
What else can they do to really level up their fast English game?
One thing that often gets overlooked is intonation.
Okay.
It's not just about the individual sounds, but the overall musicality of the language.
Ooh, the music of language. I'm intrigued. But how exactly does intonation play into speaking fast English?
Well, think about it this way. When native speakers speak quickly, their voices rise and fall in a very specific way.
Okay.
It's like a dance between the words. And it's what gives the language its natural flow and makes it sound so effortless.
So it's like we're adding rhythm to the mix. And paying attention to how those rises and falls happen can make a big difference in sounding more natural.
Exactly. It's like learning to hit the right notes in a song.
Right.
And just like with reductions, the best way to learn is by listening to and imitating native speakers.
Got it. So time to fire up those streaming services and get our ears tuned into the melody of American English.
That's right.
But let's not forget, this isn't just about mimicking.
No,
It's about understanding the why behind the what.
I couldn't agree more. It's about developing an intuitive sense of how the language works.
And speaking of intuition, what's one thing you'd recommend our listener focus on to really unlock that natural, effortless way of speaking? Something that might surprise them.
That's a good one. I think what often gets overlooked is the importance of pausing.
Okay.
It might seem counterintuitive, but using pauses strategically can actually make your speech sound faster and more natural.
Hold on, pausing to speak faster.
Yeah.
Now that's a mind bender. Explain yourself.
Think about it this way. When we speak naturally, we don't just rattle off words in a monotone.
Okay.
We pause for emphasis, for breath, and to let our thoughts catch up with our mouths.
Ooh, I see what you're saying. It's about creating that natural rhythm we talked about.
Exactly.
Those pauses give our brains a micro moment to process and our mouths a chance to set up for the next phrase.
Exactly. It's like adding punctuation to your speech.
Right.
And when you use pauses effectively, it can make your speech sound more engaging and easier to understand, even when you're speaking quickly.
Okay. I am officially sold on the power of the pause.
Good.
Who knew that silence could be the secret weapon to fluency?
I know, right?
But here's another question, and this one's for you, dear listener. I think about all the ways we've been talking about language changing.
Uh-huh.
How do you feel about embracing that evolution?
Yeah.
What stands out to you as the most exciting or intimidating part of speaking fast English?
It is a fascinating thing to consider, isn't it?
Yeah.
Language is in constant motion.
Right.
And choosing to ride that wave can be both exhilarating and maybe a little scary.
Yeah, kind of like jumping into a fast-moving river.
Yeah,
You got to trust the current and let it carry you.
exactly.
Speaking of flow, I feel like we've uncovered some really valuable insights on this deep dive.
I think so too.
We explored reductions, pronunciation, tweaks the power of intonation, and even those strategic pauses.
Yeah, we've certainly covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
And the big takeaway for me is that fluency isn't a destination.
Right.
It's a journey. It's about constantly fine-tuning those skills, playing around with new sounds, and ultimately finding your own voice within the language.
Beautifully said. And I think these sources have given us the tools to do just that.
I agree.
It's not about memorizing a bunch of rules.
Right.
It's about understanding the underlying mechanics that make American English tick.
Exactly. It's like developing an ear for the music of the language,
Right.
the rhythm of those reductions, the subtle shifts in intonation. And
Yeah.
the more you listen, the more you'll internalize those patterns and make them your own.
I feel like we've cracked the code.
I think we have.
It's like we've been given this secret map to fluency, and now it's our turn to explore the terrain.
And who knows what amazing discoveries await us along the way.
Okay, before we wrap up this deep dive, I have to ask.
Sure.
What's one final thought you want to leave our listener with?
Okay.
Something to spark their curiosity and keep them thinking even after this episode ends.
Well, we've talked a lot about how American English changes in casual settings.
Yeah.
But what about other English-speaking cultures?
Oh.
How do Australians or Brits, for instance, use reductions and intonation? Do they have their own unique shortcuts and rhythms?
Ooh, that's a great question.
It is.
It's like a whole new layer of the language to explore.
Right.
And you know what?
But
I have a feeling our listener is just the person to take on that challenge.
indeed. So, to our listener, I encourage you to listen deeply, experiment fearlessly, and above all, enjoy the journey of mastering fast English.
And hey, if you stumble across any particularly mind-blowing reductions or pronunciation tricks, be sure to share them with us.
Please do.
Until next time, happy language exploration.